I turned 18 on a Tuesday. No party, no big speech about adulthood. Just a sheet cake from the grocery store and a text from my mom that said, "We'll celebrate properly later." Later turned out to be a word my family used when they didn't plan to show up. 2 weeks after graduation, my parents told me I'd be staying with my grandma for a bit. They didn't sit me down. They didn't ask what I wanted. My dad said it while rinsing a coffee mug like he was reading the weather. "It'll be easier if you help your grandma this summer. Things are busy here." Busy meant my sister Kylie. Kylie was 16 and already had coaches calling the house. Private lessons, travel teams, a calendar taped to the fridge that revolved around her. I had a different calendar, the boring kind. Orientation dates, FAFSA reminders, a list of community college classes I could afford if everything lined up. My plan wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. My mom smiled in that careful way she used when she wanted something to sound reasonable. "This isn't permanent, Alyssa. Just until we get through the next season." Next season was another word that meant nothing. I packed a suitcase thinking I'd be back by August. I left most of my stuff in my room. Posters on the wall, my laptop charger plugged in, the door closed like it always had. No one said goodbye to it. The drive to my grandma's place took 3 hours. My dad talked about traffic. My mom scrolled through her phone. Kylie had her earbuds in tapping along to a song only she could hear. At a red light, she leaned forward and said, "You'll be fine. Grandma needs help anyway." She said it like she was offering me a favor. My grandma lived in a small town where the grocery store closed at 9 and everyone knew who got a new car. Her house smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. She hugged me tight, then asked how long I was staying. My parents answered for me. "Just the summer," my mom said. "Maybe a little longer." They unloaded my suitcase, one suitcase, not even the big one. When they left, my grandma stood on the porch, waving until their car turned the corner. Then she looked at me and said, "Well, we'll figure it out." That night, I slept in the guest room. The mattress sagged in the middle. I stared at the ceiling and waited for the familiar feeling of being home to settle in. It didn't. I texted my mom to ask about my college paperwork. No reply. I told myself she was busy. The first week passed quietly. I helped my grandma with errands. I learned which cabinet held the good mugs and which drawer stuck if you pulled too hard. I called home every few days. My dad answered once and said everything was hectic. Kylie had a tournament out of state. He promised to call back. He didn't. On Friday, I checked my email for an orientation update. Nothing. I checked the school portal and got a message saying my account was inactive. I thought it was a glitch. I tried again. Same message. I called the admissions office from my grandma's kitchen, standing next to the sink so I could whisper. The woman on the phone asked for my name and date of birth, then paused. "It looks like your enrollment was withdrawn." Withdrawn wasn't a word that fit in my mouth. By who? She read the note out loud, careful and polite. Request submitted by parent. File closed last month. I hung up and stared at the wall. The clock ticked. My grandma's dog snored. Nothing else changed, which somehow made it worse. I called my mom, straight to voicemail. I called my dad. He picked up on the third ring. I asked him why my enrollment was withdrawn. He sighed like I'd asked about something inconvenient. "We talked about this. It's not the right time." "We didn't talk about this," I said. "You decided it." "It's a family decision," he said. "Kylie needs the support right now." I asked about FAFSA. He said we'd revisit it later. I asked when later was. He said, "Don't be dramatic." I hung up before he could tell me to calm down. That was the moment it clicked. I wasn't staying for the summer. I was being parked. Moved out of the way so everything could run smoother without me. Kylie sent me a picture that night. Her in a new uniform smiling with her arm around a coach. The caption said, "Big things coming." I stared at it until my phone dimmed. If you've ever been the kid who gets labeled low maintenance, you know what comes next. You become invisible on purpose. You don't ask for rides. You don't complain. You don't need much. And one day, everyone decides you don't need anything at all. I started working at the diner down the road. Morning shifts, coffee refills, People who called me hon and tipped in loose change. I used the money to buy groceries and gas. My grandma tried to protest. I told her it was temporary. There's that word again. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a letter from my high school about an alumni scholarship I'd been nominated for. It was addressed to my parents' house, forwarded late. I stared at it, then folded it back up and put it in my bag. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't have the energy to explain how small things kept slipping through cracks no one bothered to fix. The worst part wasn't the money or the paperwork. It was the silence. No check-ins. No, how are you holding up? When my grandma asked if my parents were coming to visit, I said they were busy. She nodded like she understood, but her eyes didn't buy it. Here's the part where I need you to pause for a second. If this sounds familiar, if you've ever been labeled temporary so someone else could drop a comment. I read them. And if you want stories that don't sugarcoat family drama, hit subscribe. I promise I won't waste your time. The summer heat settled in. My grandma's air conditioner rattled and lost the fight by noon. I learned to keep the curtains closed and the lights off. I learned which bills came first. I learned that being responsible doesn't make people respect you. It just makes them expect more. On my birthday, a card arrived from my parents. No return address. Inside a gift card and a note that said, "Proud of you." No call, no plan to see me. I put the card in a drawer and made myself a sandwich. I didn't hate them. Not yet. I was still doing that thing where you assume people will fix it once they realize how bad it looks. I told myself they'd come get me. I told myself August would come and this would all make sense. August came. The diner got busier. Kylie posted pictures from another tournament. My room back home stayed closed, untouched like a museum display for a kid who'd moved on without anyone noticing. One evening, my grandma asked me what I was going to do next. I said I didn't know. She nodded and handed me a stack of coupons to sort. "You'll figure it out," she said. "You always do." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was a detour and not the road itself. I stood at the kitchen counter, cutting out discounts I wasn't sure we needed, and tried to picture a future that didn't require permission from people who had already decided I was expendable. The thing about being called temporary is that it forces you to start thinking long-term, not in big dreams, in exits, in systems, in places where rules are written down and decisions aren't made in kitchens over coffee mugs. I didn't know what that place was yet. I just knew it wasn't here, and it wasn't with them. I folded the coupons back into a neat stack and slid them into the kitchen drawer, then wiped my hands on a dish towel because staying busy felt safer than thinking. The diner hired me full-time by accident. One of the waitresses quit mid-shift, and the manager asked if I could cover mornings for a while. "You're reliable," he said, like that was a personality trait instead of a survival skill. I took the hours without negotiating. Morning shifts meant I could be home by mid-afternoon to help my grandma, which meant fewer questions about money. My days settled into a rhythm that didn't ask what I wanted. Up before 6. Coffee that tasted burned no matter how much cream I added. The same regulars, the same jokes. People who thought my name was Sweetheart because it was easier than reading a badge. I learned to smile without meaning it, and to keep my voice calm when someone snapped their fingers for a refill. At home, my grandma tried not to need much. She'd wait until I sat down before asking me to grab something from the store, even if it meant another trip. When I offered to pay a bill, she'd wave it off with a laugh that didn't quite land. "I've managed this long," she'd say. "Don't you worry." I worried anyway. I worried about the electric bill that crept higher each month. I worried about her knees when she stood up too fast. I worried about the way she paused before opening mail like she was bracing for bad news. I checked my email every night, hoping for something official to prove there had been a mistake. Nothing came. No orientation reminders. No financial aid updates. Just automated messages from places I'd applied to months ago asking if I was still interested. I didn't reply. I didn't know what to say. I called my mom once more late in the evening after my shift. She answered on the second ring out of breath. I could hear a TV in the background, some sports channel turned up loud. I asked about my paperwork. She told me now wasn't a good time. Kylie's getting ready for another weekend, she said. This is stressful for all of us. All of us. I repeated, staring at the calendar on the wall. August was already half over. This is bigger than you right now, she said. Not unkindly, not kindly either. Just factual, like gravity. After that, I stopped calling. It wasn't dramatic. I just ran out of reasons. The mail kept coming, though. Forwarded envelopes with my name on them, always late. A scholarship notice that had already expired. A reminder about housing deposits I hadn't known existed. Each letter felt like evidence from a life I wasn't allowed to attend. I stacked them in a shoebox under my bed because throwing them away felt permanent, and keeping them felt like control. At work, one of the cooks asked if I was starting school soon. I told him I was taking time off. He nodded like he'd expected that. Smart, he said. College'll always be there. I wanted to ask him where it went when your parents closed the door for you. Instead, I refilled his coffee. Kylie posted constantly. New gear, new photos, captions about discipline and sacrifice. People commented things like, so proud and future star. My parents liked every post within minutes. I stopped scrolling after a while. It wasn't jealousy, it was math. Every like was a reminder of where the attention went. One afternoon, my grandma asked me to sit with her at the table. She held a letter from the insurance company, her hand trembling just enough to notice. I don't want to worry you, she said, which meant she already had. I read the letter twice and told her we'd figure it out. I didn't know how, but saying it out loud steadied something in me. When she went to rest, I opened my notebook and started writing numbers down. Hours, tips, bills. I wasn't planning a future. I was managing a leak. That night, I dreamed I was back in my room at my parents' house, standing in front of the closet. Everything was still there, exactly where I'd left it. When I reached for my jacket, my hand went straight through the hanger like it wasn't real. I woke up before the feeling could settle. The next morning, my manager pulled me aside. He said the diner might cut hours after Labor Day. Tourism dipped in the fall. Just a heads up, he said. I thanked him and went back to wiping counters. On my break, I sat outside and watched a delivery truck unload boxes across the street. The driver moved with purpose, like he knew where he was going, and when he'd get there. I realized I hadn't had that feeling in months. Not since someone else decided my plans were optional. I walked home that evening instead of catching a ride. The air was heavy, the kind that makes you feel slower than you are. When I reached the house, my grandma was asleep in her chair, the TV murmuring to no one. I turned it off and covered her with a blanket. In my room, I opened the shoebox again. I lined the letters up on the bed, oldest to newest. The pattern was clear. Decisions made without me. Timelines that assumed I'd disappear quietly. I thought about calling my dad, then didn't. I already knew what he'd say. I sat on the edge of the bed and did something I hadn't done yet. I admitted just to myself that this wasn't a pause. It was a reroute. And reroutes required different maps. The idea didn't come with relief. It came with a kind of focus. If my life was going to be small for a while, it would at least be deliberate. I started listing what I needed that didn't depend on anyone else. A steady paycheck, health insurance, a place to live that couldn't be taken away with a phone call, rules that applied the same way every time. I didn't know where to find all that. I just knew it wasn't going to show up in my inbox by accident. When my grandma woke up, she asked what I was working on. I told her I was thinking. She smiled and said, thinking is free, for now. Later, lying in bed, I listened to the house settle. Pipes clicking, floorboards shifting. I pictured my parents' kitchen, the one where decisions got made over coffee mugs. I pictured my old room untouched. I didn't feel angry, I felt accounted for, counted out. Somewhere between the ticking clock and the quiet, a line formed in my head, simple and uncomfortable. If I stayed where I was placed, nothing would change. And no one who put me here was coming back to move me. I stared at the list on my notebook until the words blurred, then closed it and reached for my phone because pretending nothing hurt took less effort than sitting with the truth. Kylie's face filled the screen before I even opened the app. New post, new uniform. A caption about sacrifice and focus. She stood between two coaches, smiling like she'd already won something. The comments stacked up fast. Proud of you. So inspiring. Future looks bright. My parents' names popped up almost immediately, hearts and clapping hands, like they were on a timer. I set the phone down and went to make dinner. At the table, my grandma asked how work was. I told her it was fine. That word had become a habit. Fine meant manageable. Fine meant I hadn't fallen apart yet. She nodded and told me a story about someone she used to know who worked 3 jobs and still made it. I listened and nodded at the right moments. Grateful she wasn't asking questions I couldn't answer. Later that night, Kylie texted me, not to check in, to vent. Practice schedule's insane, she wrote. I don't even have time to breathe. I typed sounds intense, then deleted it. I typed, hope it's worth it, and deleted that too. I finally sent, you got this. She replied with a thumbs up and a picture of a new pair of shoes. Custom. My name wasn't on them. The next day at the diner, a woman recognized my last name on the receipt. You related to that girl, she asked, nodding toward her phone like Kylie lived inside it. She's everywhere lately. I said yes and waited for the compliment that always followed. Must be nice, the woman said. Having talent like that. I smiled and brought her check. That afternoon, my mom called. I almost didn't answer. Habit 1. She talked fast, excited. Kylie had been invited to a showcase. Big opportunity. Lots of eyes. She said it like she expected applause on the other end. That's great, I said. I meant it in a technical way. Good outcome. No emotion attached. We're all making sacrifices, my mom added like an afterthought. It won't always be like this. I didn't ask what this was. I didn't need clarification. Before hanging up, she said, by the way, don't forget to forward any mail that shows up. Things get confusing when paperwork isn't in one place. I looked at the shoebox under my bed after the call ended. Confusing. That was one word for it. At work, the manager handed me next week's schedule. Fewer hours. He shrugged, apologetic. I nodded like I understood. On my break, I calculated tips in my head and wondered how many shifts I could pick up elsewhere without burning out. That evening, my grandma mentioned my parents might visit soon. Your mom said something about September, she said, carefully watching my face. I said okay and went to wash dishes. They didn't come in September. Or October. Kylie's schedule filled up. There was always another weekend, another event. Another reason not to drive 3 hours to a town without a highlight reel. One morning, a letter arrived with my name spelled wrong. Inside was a local paper featuring Kylie. Half a page. A photo of her mid-action, focused and fierce. The article mentioned her dedication, her support system, her parents. I read it twice, then folded it and slid it back into the envelope. I didn't tell my grandma. She already knew enough. I thought about sending the article to my parents with a note that said, congrats. I didn't. It would have sounded sarcastic, even if it wasn't meant to be. Instead, I went to work. The cook asked if I wanted to pick up extra shifts. Someone was out sick. I said yes without checking the calendar. The idea of a calendar still felt like a joke. That night, Kylie called. Not a text. A call. I answered because curiosity won. She talked about the showcase, the pressure, the expectations. Sometimes I feel like if I mess up, everything falls apart, she said. I waited for the part where she asked how I was. It didn't come. You'll be fine, she added, like she was remembering something important. You always land on your feet. I said, sure. There was a pause. Then she said the thing she'd probably said 100 times to herself. I mean, this is my shot. I didn't argue. I didn't remind her whose shot had been quietly closed. I just listened until she ran out of words. After the call, I sat on the edge of the bed and felt something shift. Not anger, clarity. Kylie wasn't doing this to me. She didn't have to. The system was already built. She was just standing in the spotlight it pointed at her. The next week, my dad finally called. He sounded tired. We're stretched thin, he said. Just until things stabilize. Stabilize meant until Kylie's future was secure. Everything else was background noise. I need you to understand, he added. This isn't personal. That's what people say when it is. I told him I understood. I meant that too. I understood exactly where I ranked. When the call ended, I opened my notebook again. I crossed out a few lines and added others. Rent estimates, insurance numbers, jobs that came with benefits, things that didn't care whose daughter I was. My grandma came into the room and leaned against the doorframe. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah." She studied me for a moment, then said, "You don't have to be quiet about this." "I know," I said. "I just don't want to waste the energy." She smiled soft and tired. "That's fair." Later, lying in bed, I replayed my dad's words. Not personal, just business, just priorities, just timing. I realized something then. Being the golden child didn't make Kylie cruel. It made her central. Everything orbited around her success. Everything else adjusted accordingly, including me. I didn't feel replaced. I felt optimized out. The thought settled without drama. If this was how choices were made, then I needed a place where choices followed rules, not moods, where effort mattered more than proximity, where being fine wasn't the expectation, just the baseline. I turned off the light and listened to the house again. The same sounds, the same quiet. Only now it didn't feel like waiting. It felt like inventory. I tore the page out of my notebook and folded it twice, then tucked it into my pocket like I might need proof that the numbers were real. The diner cut my hours again. Not enough to fire me, just enough to keep me nervous. The manager apologized, said fall was always slow. I told him I understood and meant it. Understanding had become second nature. On my way home, I stopped at the grocery store and did the math in my head, putting things back one by one. Store-brand cereal instead of the good kind. No fresh berries. I skipped the deli counter entirely. At home, my grandma was sitting at the table with a stack of envelopes. She slid them toward me without a word. Utility bills, insurance, the kind of mail that never waits for the right time. I sorted them into piles and told her we were okay. She didn't argue, she just watched me with a look that said she knew exactly how much pretending costs. That night, I lay awake listening to the refrigerator hum and thought about all the ways people told you college would still be there. They never explained how to get back once someone else closed the gate. The next morning, I walked past the community center on my way to work. There was a bulletin board outside with flyers layered on top of each other. Yard sales, church suppers. A faded poster with an eagle on it caught my eye. U.S. Navy, careers, benefits. I stopped without meaning to. The recruiter's office was 2 blocks over, wedged between a tax place and a cell phone repair shop. I stood outside longer than I needed to, reading the same lines through the window. Education benefits, health care, steady pay, nothing flashy, no promises about being special. Inside it smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. The recruiter looked up from his desk and asked how he could help. His voice was neutral, like he'd said it 1,000 times. I told him I was just looking. He didn't rush me. He didn't tell me I'd be a hero. He asked where I was from what I did for work, if I had any plans. When I said not really, he nodded like that made sense. "This isn't an escape," he said at one point, tapping a pen against the desk. "It's structure. If you need structure, it works. If you don't, it doesn't." I thought about my parents' kitchen table, where decisions floated around without landing. I thought about the shoebox under my bed. I thought about bills waiting patiently for attention. "How long does it take?" I asked. "Depends," he said. "Nothing's fast." I left with a packet under my arm and a feeling I couldn't name. Not hope, not fear. Something closer to alignment. I didn't tell my grandma that night. I made dinner and talked about the weather. After she went to bed, I spread the paperwork out on my desk. Requirements, timelines, tests. Everything laid out in black and white. No maybes, no we'll see. Kylie posted again. Another photo, another caption about grinding. I double-tapped/editorially scrolled past and kept reading the packet. The physical test looked doable. The background check was thorough. I laughed quietly at that part. If they wanted to know where I'd been, I could show them receipts. I scheduled the ASVAB for the following week and circled the date in my notebook. It felt strange to mark something that depended entirely on me. At work, I told the manager I might need a morning off soon. He raised an eyebrow but said okay. Just let me know, he said. No guilt, no questions. I realized how rare that was. The test day came and went without drama. Pencils, instructions. The kind of stress that had an end time. When the recruiter called with the results, he sounded satisfied. "You've got options," he said. Options was a word I hadn't heard in a while. I told my grandma that evening. I expected worry. I expected questions. She sat very still, then asked how far away it was. When I told her, she nodded. "You always did better when things had rules," she said. My parents found out a week later. Not from me. From paperwork forwarded late as usual. My mom called voice tight. "The Navy," she said, like I'd announced I was moving to another planet. "It's stable," I said. "I'll have benefits." There was a pause. Then, "We were hoping you'd stay close for now." Close to what I didn't ask. My dad took the phone. He talked about risks, about timing, about how this might complicate things. I listened and said nothing. When he asked if I'd already decided, I said yes. "Well," he said finally, "if that's what you think is best." It wasn't approval. It wasn't disapproval. It was dismissal wrapped in permission. Kylie didn't call. She sent a text that said, "Wow. That's intense." I replied with a thumbs up and went back to filling out forms. The enlistment process took weeks. Fingerprints, physicals, paperwork that asked the same questions in different ways. Each appointment felt like a small handhold on a wall I was finally climbing. There were delays. There were moments I thought something would fall through. Nothing did. The night before I left, I packed everything I owned into 2 bags. This time, I took my charger. My grandma insisted on driving me to the bus station. She didn't cry. She handed me a folder with copies of my documents and a note written in careful handwriting. For emergencies, it said, and reminders. At the station, I watched people hug and cry and make promises they'd forget to keep. When it was time to board, my grandma squeezed my hand. "Call when you can," she said. "I will," I said, and meant it. As the bus pulled away, I didn't look back. Not because I was brave. Because looking back had never changed anything. I checked my phone once out of habit. No messages, no last-minute doubts from anyone who mattered. I turned it off and leaned my head against the window. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for someone to decide what happened next. I was following a schedule I'd chosen toward a place that didn't care whose sister I was or how bright anyone else shined. The bus hissed to a stop, the doors folded open, and a voice cut through the aisle, telling us to move faster than our bodies wanted to. I stepped onto the pavement with 1 bag and a number already assigned to me. There wasn't time to look around. There wasn't space to hesitate. We were lined up, counted, corrected, and corrected again. Someone shouted my last name, and I answered too softly, then learned immediately that soft wasn't useful here. They took our phones first, then our clothes, then the idea that anyone cared how we felt about it. Haircuts happened fast and without commentary. I watched my reflection change in the mirror and felt nothing dramatic about it. This wasn't loss. It was reduction. Fewer choices, less noise. The first night was loud and bright and endless. Instructions came in blocks. Stand here, sit there, don't speak unless told. I followed them exactly because precision was the only thing that kept me invisible. Invisible was good. The days blurred into a schedule that didn't ask permission. Wake up. Make the bed until it looked like no one had slept in it. Eat quickly, move faster, learn to move faster. I learned where to stand, how to hold my hands, how to breathe through corrections without flinching. Some people tried to stand out. Some tried to joke. Some cried quietly at night, faces turned to the wall. I didn't do any of that. I kept my head down and counted steps. I'd been training for this longer than I realized. The first time someone yelled inches from my face, I didn't freeze. I focused on a spot over their shoulder and waited for the words to end. It wasn't bravery, it was familiarity. I'd learned a long time ago that reacting gave people more power than they needed. There were moments when my body argued back. Muscles I didn't know existed made themselves known. My lungs burned in a way that felt personal. During one run, I fell behind by half a step and felt panic spike sharp and quick. I corrected without thinking. Half a step became one, then none. At night, when the lights finally went out, my mind did something strange. It went quiet. There was no room to spiral, no shoebox of letters, no unanswered calls, just the hum of air and the knowledge that tomorrow would look exactly like today. Predictable was a relief. Letters arrived after the first week. Some people got stacks. Some got nothing. I got one from my grandma, short, steady. She told me she was fine and the tomatoes were coming in early. She didn't ask when I'd be home. She didn't need to. I didn't hear from my parents. Not a card, not a note. I noticed the absence and kept moving. We learned how to fold everything the same way. How to stand at attention without locking our knees. How to clean until a room looked untouched. When someone messed up, everyone paid. I learned to fix mistakes that weren't mine without resenting it. That skill came easier than expected. There was a day when a recruit next to me whispered that she couldn't do this. I told her to drink water and keep going. Not because I was kind, because stopping wasn't an option anyone here respected. The physical tests came and went. I passed. Not with room to brag, with room to continue. Evaluations followed. Consistent one instructor said like it was a compliment. I took it as one. Halfway through us, a rumor moved through the ranks about Family Day. Visitors. Photos. Hugs. I didn't think about it until the list went up. Names were checked off. Mine wasn't. I stood in line and watched people scan for familiar faces. I felt a flicker of something in my chest and shut it down. I'd learned how to do that too. On Family Day, I cleaned my boots twice and helped someone else with their uniform. I wrote my grandma a letter and folded it into thirds. I didn't mention where I was standing or what I was missing. She wouldn't want the inventory. A week later, I got a message through the system. My dad, short. Hope you're doing okay. No questions. No follow-up. I read it once and closed it. Hope wasn't a plan. Toward the end, the instructors eased off just enough to let us notice. People started to talk about what came next, where they'd be stationed, what they'd do with their first paycheck. I listened and kept my answers vague. Graduation came without ceremony for me. There was a formation. There were instructions. There were photos taken by someone else's family that I stayed out of. When it was over, I packed my bag and waited for the next set of orders. I stood there in a uniform that finally fit, holding paperwork that told me where to go next. No one hugged me. No one asked how it felt. I felt steady. That was enough. On the ride out, someone joked about calling home. I looked out the window and thought about my grandma's kitchen, the coupons in the drawer, the clock that ticked too loud at night. I thought about the diner and the way my manager said reliable, like it was all I'd ever be. Here, reliable meant something else. It meant you showed up the same way every time. It meant you followed through. It meant no one needed to guess what you'd do under pressure. When my phone was returned, it buzzed once. A message from Kylie sent days ago. Saw pics online. Guess you made it. I typed, yeah. Then erased it and turned the phone off again. I didn't feel proud. I didn't feel changed. I felt aligned. The schedule told me where to be. The rules told me how to move. For the first time since I'd been called temporary, nothing about my life depended on being chosen by someone else. I slid my phone back into my pocket and followed the line toward the transport, reading the posted instructions like they were a contract I actually believed in. My first duty station didn't look like anything from a recruitment poster. Beige buildings, long hallways, a smell that was half cleaner, half coffee that had been reheated too many times. I reported where I was told, handed over paperwork, and got assigned a rack in a room with 3 other women who didn't ask personal questions. We all learned each other's routines before we learned names. The work itself was straightforward. Show up early, follow procedures, don't improvise unless told. I took notes like my life depended on it because in a way it did. There was comfort in knowing exactly what was expected. No guessing, no emotional tax. My supervisor was fair in the way people are when they don't need to be liked. He corrected mistakes without commentary and acknowledged competence without celebration. When I stayed late to help close out a task, he nodded once and said, "Good work." I stored that away. It was enough. Payday came and went quietly. I checked my account twice to make sure the numbers were real. Steady, predictable. I paid my grandma's electric bill without telling her and set up a small transfer for groceries each month. I didn't frame it as help. I framed it as maintenance. When I called her, she asked if I was eating enough. I told her yes. She asked if I was tired. I told her sometimes. She laughed and said that meant I was doing it right. I didn't call my parents. They didn't call me. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt neutral, like weather you plan around. Kylie sent updates in bursts, screenshots of articles, complaints about travel, a photo of her with my parents at some event I didn't recognize. I responded with short messages when it felt polite and left the rest unread. There was no argument to win. There was no role for me in that conversation. At work, evaluations came back clean. Not glowing, clean. Consistent showed up again. Detail-oriented, low drama. I smiled at that last one and went back to my desk. Being low drama had finally started to pay off. I learned how to manage my time like it was a resource someone could audit. Gym before shift, meal prep on Sundays, laundry on a schedule. I bought a planner and used it. The pages filled up with things that actually happened. One afternoon, a senior enlisted woman stopped by my workspace. She asked how long I'd been in and where I was from. When I told her, she nodded slowly. "You're doing fine," she said. "Don't rush it." I didn't ask what not rushing looked like. I didn't need a finish line. I needed traction. My first leave request got approved without debate. I went home to see my grandma, not my parents. She hugged me longer than usual and told me I looked different. Not taller, she said, just steadier. I fixed a cabinet hinge and replaced a flickering light bulb. Small things, tangible things. When I left, she slipped a container of leftovers into my bag like I was still 16. I didn't correct her. Back on base, a few people invited me out. I went once. It was fine. Loud, temporary. I realized I didn't miss the noise. I preferred the quiet satisfaction of knowing my rent was paid and my alarm would go off on time. The first time my dad called it caught me off guard. He asked how the Navy was. I told him it was work. He asked if I liked it. I said it was stable. "That's good," he said. "Stability matters." I waited for something else. An apology, an acknowledgement. It didn't come. He asked if I'd be home for the holidays. I said I didn't know my schedule yet. That wasn't a lie. After the call, I sat at my desk and finished the task in front of me. I didn't replay the conversation. I didn't need to. Months stacked up. My savings grew. My confidence did too, but quietly. I learned who to trust at work and who to keep at arm's length. I learned that competence travels faster than complaints. I learned that when you don't overshare, people stop trying to manage you. One evening, I ran into a coworker in the hallway who joked that the military owned us. I smiled and said, "Only during working hours." He laughed, but I meant it. This job had boundaries, clear ones. I started taking online classes paid for through benefits one at a time. Nothing flashy, just progress that couldn't be undone by someone else's mood. I didn't announce it. I didn't post about it. I logged in, did the work, logged out. Kylie's messages slowed. My parents' updates became vague. Something about schedules. About money being tight. I noticed the shift without reacting to it. I'd learned not to fill in gaps people left on purpose. At work, a new project came up that needed someone reliable to coordinate. My supervisor asked if I could handle it. I said yes and meant it. When it wrapped, he told me I'd done well and moved on. No ceremony, no strings. That night, I stood in my room and looked around. Everything I owned fit where it was supposed to. Nothing felt borrowed. Nothing felt temporary. I checked my account, set my alarm, and laid out my uniform for the next day. The routine didn't feel restrictive. It felt earned. Somewhere along the way, without anyone announcing it, my life had stopped being something other people rearranged. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with a speech. It showed up in small decisions that stayed put. When my phone buzzed with a missed call, I didn't recognize I let it go to voicemail. I listened later. My mom's voice. Cheerful, strained. "Call me when you can," she said. "We should catch up." I deleted the message and finished getting ready for bed, noting how easy it was to decide what did and didn't get my attention now. I let the voicemail sit for 2 days before listening to it again, standing in the hallway outside my workspace with my back against the wall so no one could overhear. My mom's voice sounded lighter than it should have. "Too careful. We've had a rough couple of weeks," she said. "Nothing serious. We just thought it might be nice to talk." Nice was another word my family used when they wanted something. I didn't call back right away. I finished my shift, went to the gym, ate dinner, and did my laundry, like the message hadn't landed in my pocket with weight. When I finally dialed, it was because ignoring it felt like letting them set the tone. My dad answered. He didn't waste time. "Kylie's hurt," he said. "Shoulder? Bad enough she's out for the season." I said I was sorry and meant it. Injuries weren't abstract to me anymore. I knew what they cost. He waited like he expected more. "She's seeing specialists," he continued. "Physical therapy. It's adding up." There it was, the pivot. "I don't know what you want me to say," I replied. There was a pause. My mom picked up the other line. "We were hoping you could help," she said. "Just temporarily, until things stabilize." Stabilize again. Same word. Different crisis. I asked how much. She gave me a number that would have wiped out most of my savings if I'd still been the girl cutting coupons. I looked at my account balance on the screen in front of me and felt something close to irony. "You're doing well now," she added. "The Navy takes care of you. You don't have expenses like we do." I didn't argue with that. I didn't need to. I send money to Grandma every month, I said. That's my priority. "She's fine," my dad said quickly. "We're talking about your sister." I pictured Kylie's posts, the shoes, the articles, the endless encouragement. I pictured my grandma at her kitchen table, bills spread out neatly, trying not to ask. "Why now?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. My mom sighed. "Family helps family." I leaned my head back against the wall and closed my eyes. The phrase slid into place like a familiar bruise. I need to think I said and hung up before they could fill the space with pressure. The next day, my dad sent a text with a breakdown of costs. Clinical, detailed, like a spreadsheet I hadn't agreed to review. Kylie followed it with a message that said, "I didn't want this. Mom made them ask." I didn't respond. At work, I asked a senior enlisted woman I trusted if she had a minute. We sat in an empty office door closed. I didn't frame it as drama. I framed it as logistics. Family asking for money, past history, current obligations. She listened without interrupting, then said, "You're allowed to say no." I nodded. "I know. You don't have to justify it," she added. "You don't owe them access because they share your last name." I went back to my desk and finished the day's work with more focus than usual. Clarity did that. That evening, my mom called again. I didn't answer. My dad followed with a message that said, "We're under a lot of stress." Kylie sent a longer one about pain and uncertainty, and how she'd never imagined things would turn out like this. I read it once and set the phone down. I called my grandma instead. She asked how I was. I told her I was okay. She said she'd gotten a call from my mom earlier. "She sounded tired," she said carefully. "Did she ask you for money?" I asked. My grandma hesitated. She asked if I'd heard from you. That was answer enough. After the call, I opened my notebook and wrote 2 columns. Obligations, choices. Under obligations, I wrote my rent, my bills, my grandma's groceries, my own future. Under choices, I wrote my parents' emergency. Seeing it laid out didn't make the decision easy. It made it honest. I drafted a message and deleted it twice. On the 3rd try, I kept it simple. "I can't help financially," I wrote. "I hope Kylie recovers well." My mom replied almost immediately, "That's disappointing." My dad followed. "We didn't raise you to turn your back on family." I stared at the screen until the words lost shape. Then I typed back, "You raised me to adapt." There was no response after that, for a day, then 2. On the 3rd day, my aunt called. Same script, same tone, concern wrapped in expectation. I repeated the same answer. She told me I'd regret it. I thanked her for her opinion and ended the call. At work, nothing changed. Tasks came in, tasks went out. I was assigned another responsibility and completed it without fanfare. The normalcy felt protective. Kylie called that night. She sounded different, less confident. "They're scared," she said. "I am too." "I know," I replied. "I didn't ask for this," she added. "I know," I said again. There was a silence that felt almost mutual. Then she said, "I guess things are different now." "Yes," I said. "They are." When the call ended, I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned again. Saying no hadn't cost me anything I couldn't afford to lose. The messages slowed after that. My parents tried once more, then shifted tactics. Guilt, memory, selective nostalgia. I let it wash over me without absorbing it. One evening, after a long shift, I sat on my bed and reviewed my budget. Everything balanced, everything accounted for. The numbers didn't care about history, they cared about reality. I realized then that this was the first time my family had needed me more than I needed them. And the difference showed. I set my phone face down, laid out my uniform for the next day, and turned off the light. Noting how quiet the room felt when no one else was trying to negotiate my choices. I left my phone face down on the nightstand and focused on the quiet, the kind that only shows up when no one is arguing with your decisions. By morning, the quiet was gone. 3 missed calls. 2 from numbers I didn't recognize. 1 from my dad. A text from my mom followed upbeat in a way that didn't match the situation. "We've been talking and think it's best if we all get on the same page." Same page meant a page they'd already written. At work, I kept my routine intact. Morning brief, tasks assigned. Deadlines met. The structure held while everything else tried to bend around it. On my break, I checked the messages. One voicemail was from my aunt, the one who liked to mediate by repeating whatever my parents wanted said. She talked about family unity and hard times, and how money wasn't the real issue. I deleted it halfway through. Another call came in while I was still standing there. My dad again. I let it ring. He followed with a text that said, "Please, we just need to talk." I typed back, "I'm at work," then added, "Text is fine." The response came quickly. "We're under a lot of pressure. This is bigger than feelings." That line made me stop walking. Bigger than feelings. Like feelings were a luxury item you put back on the shelf when things got expensive. That evening, my mom called again. I answered this time. She launched into logistics, payment plans, short-term loans, promises that it would all be temporary. She spoke like she'd already assumed my yes. "I've thought about it," I said when she paused for breath. "The answer is no." She went quiet, then said, "I don't understand how you can live with that." "I live with it the same way I lived with being left," I replied. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. She told me I was being cold. My dad got on the line and told me I was being selfish. Kylie sent a message asking me not to make this worse. The word worse sat there like a dare. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I said the same thing each time. I can't help financially. No footnotes. No apologies. The next wave came from extended family. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. An uncle who remembered my birthday once every decade. They all had opinions. They all framed them as concern. "You've changed," one of them said. "Yes," I replied. "I had to." At work, I asked to speak to legal assistance on base. Not because I planned to sue anyone, because clarity is easier when it's written down. The officer listened, asked a few questions, and confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't obligated to do anything. No joint accounts, no contracts, no dependents. "If you want to set a boundary," he said, "do it in writing." So I did. I opened my laptop and wrote a message I wouldn't enjoy sending, but wouldn't regret later. It was short, clear, unemotional. "I'm not able to provide financial assistance. Please don't ask again. If this continues, I won't respond." I sent it to my parents. I sent it to my aunt. I copied Kylie. The replies came fast. My mom accused me of abandoning them. My dad said this wasn't how family worked. Kylie asked if we could talk privately. I didn't respond to any of it. That night, I slept through the alarm for the first time in months and woke up confused, then calm. The boundary had done something I hadn't expected. It had quieted my head. The following days were a test. Calls came in anyway, messages stacked up. Guilt took different shapes. Childhood memories, reminders of sacrifices I'd never asked for. I followed through on what I'd said. I didn't respond. On the fourth day, my grandma called. She didn't mention money. She asked if I was eating enough and told me her neighbor's dog had gotten loose again. Then she said, "Your mother's been calling." "I know," I said. "You don't owe me an explanation," she replied. "I just want you to know I'm proud of you." That landed harder than any accusation. I thanked her and ended the call before my voice could do anything embarrassing. At work, my supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I said yes and meant it. My performance didn't dip. If anything, it sharpened. When you're not carrying other people's expectations, you move faster. Kylie finally got through late one evening. I answered because avoiding her felt different. "I feel like I'm watching everything fall apart," she said. "They're scared. I'm scared." "I know," I replied. "They keep saying you've changed," she continued. "I have," I said. "So have you." She didn't argue. She just breathed. "I don't know what to do without them managing everything," she admitted. "That's something you'll have to learn," I said. Not harsh, just true. After the call, I sat on my bed and thought about how often boundaries get mislabeled as punishment. This wasn't punishment, it was maintenance. The same kind I did for my budget and my schedule and my sanity. A week passed, the calls slowed. The messages stopped. Not because they understood, because they'd exhausted their angles. I filled that space with normal things. Meal prep, classes, extra hours at the gym, a project at work that required focus. The absence of chaos felt like progress. One afternoon, an email popped up from my dad. Shorter than the others. "We need to talk about the holidays." I read it once and archived it. That evening, I updated my planner and circled a date months away. A friend from work was getting married. I'd been asked to help. I smiled at the thought and kept writing. Choosing boundaries hadn't fixed my family. It had fixed my position in it. And once that shifted, everything else began to settle into place without asking permission. I was standing in line at the base legal office when my phone buzzed with a calendar invite I hadn't accepted yet. It wasn't from my parents. It was from someone I actually trusted. A friend from work who had become more than a friend over time, mostly because he showed up without needing reminders. We'd talked about a courthouse wedding once, casually, like it was a logistical problem instead of a milestone. Somewhere between deployments and weekend schedules, that conversation turned into something real. We didn't announce it. We didn't make a big deal out of it. We just decided. The date landed on a Saturday 6 months out. Enough time to plan without letting it turn into a spectacle. Enough time for people to reveal who they thought they were entitled to be in my life. My parents found out the way they always did, late, from someone else. My mom called the same night. No greeting, no warm-up. "You're getting married." "Yes," I said. There was a pause, then a rush of words. Excitement, shock, hurt. All stacked on top of each other, like she was hoping one of them would work. "Why didn't you tell us?" "I didn't need to," I replied. She asked where it would be. Who would be there? What kind of ceremony? I answered the factual questions and skipped the emotional ones. "We'll be there," she said, already planning. "That's not decided," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "What do you mean?" "I mean, invitations haven't gone out," I replied. "And not everyone will be invited." She laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "Don't be ridiculous." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. "I'll let you know," I said and ended the call. My dad followed up the next day with a text that said, "We deserve to be there." No punctuation, just certainty. Deserve was an interesting choice of word. I didn't respond. The pressure came faster after that. Questions framed as concern. Accusations dressed up as confusion. My aunt called to say weddings were about forgiveness. A cousin sent a message about how family photos mattered. Someone else asked if I was trying to make a statement. I was. just not the one they thought. At work, I mentioned the wedding to a senior enlisted woman I respected. She smiled and asked who was walking me down the aisle. I told her my grandma would be sitting in the front row, and that was enough for me. She nodded. Good, she said. Make it yours. I started a list that night, not a guest list, a reality list. Who showed up when I had nothing to offer? Who respected my boundaries without negotiation? Who asked questions and accepted the answers? Who knew how to be present without managing the room? My parents didn't make the list. Neither did Kylie. That decision didn't come with fireworks. It came with a sense of order, like cleaning out a closet and realizing you'd been holding on to things that never fit. I drafted a message to my parents and stared at it for a long time. I kept it short. I'm keeping the wedding small. I won't be inviting extended family. This isn't up for discussion. I sent it and turned my phone face down. The response was immediate. My mom called. I didn't answer. My dad sent a message about how hurtful this was. Kylie sent one asking if I was really doing this. I replied to Kylie once, yes. She didn't push. That surprised me. The next tactic was escalation. My parents reached out to people I hadn't spoken to in years. Old family friends, distant relatives. Somehow, they all knew my schedule well enough to call when I was off duty. I said the same thing every time. This decision isn't changing. Some accepted it, some didn't. I stopped taking calls from unknown numbers. At work, my focus didn't slip. If anything, it sharpened. The clearer my personal boundaries became, the easier everything else felt. I didn't overthink conversations. I didn't rehearse explanations. I did my job and went home. One evening, my mom sent a long message. Pages of it, memories, sacrifices, the cost of raising 2 daughters, how this wasn't what she imagined. I read it once, then I archived it. Kylie called later that week. Her voice was tired, stripped of its usual edge. They're not taking this well, she said. I know, I replied. They keep saying you're punishing them. I'm not, I said. I'm choosing. There was a quiet on the line that felt different than before. Less defensive. More reflective. I don't think they know how to be part of something they don't control, she said. That's not my problem, I replied and didn't soften it. She didn't argue. As plans took shape, I noticed something else. The absence of chaos created space. Space for details that actually mattered. Where we'd stand, who would speak, what felt right instead of what looked right. My grandma asked if I wanted help addressing invitations. I told her yes and handed her the stack. She didn't ask why certain names weren't there. She just nodded and got to work. At work, a friend offered to take a day off to help with logistics. Another volunteered to drive. No one asked what they'd get in return. My parents sent one last message together. If we're not welcome, we'll respect that. But you'll regret it. I read it and felt nothing, not anger, not doubt, just distance. I replied with a single sentence. I hope you take care of yourselves. After that, the noise stopped. I finalized the arrangements, signed the paperwork, and saved the date in my planner. Everything fit. Everything aligned. The day looked exactly how I wanted it to look, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. For the first time, a major life event didn't feel like something my family could hijack or reshape. It felt contained, protected. I set my phone down, reviewed the schedule for the week ahead, and went to bed, knowing there would be opinions waiting in the morning, just not ones I needed to carry. I woke up before my alarm and lay still listening to the quiet that only shows up when a day belongs to you. There was no rush, no messages waiting to derail anything. My phone stayed face down while I showered, dressed, and checked the time once out of habit. Outside, the air was cool and clear, the kind of morning that doesn't demand attention. It just exists. We kept the ceremony simple. No dramatic entrance, no long aisle. Just a small space reserved near the water. A handful of chairs and people who had already proven they knew how to show up without being asked twice. My grandma arrived early, dressed carefully, hands folded around her purse, like she was holding something important. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that doesn't ask questions. "You look good," she said. Not beautiful, not glowing. Good. Solid. Hers. Friends from work filtered in next. A few people I'd trained with. A couple of neighbors who'd become constants without ceremony. No one looked around for empty seats. No one whispered about who was missing. The space felt complete as it was. I didn't think about my parents while I waited. I didn't imagine them showing up late or making a scene. That version of my life didn't live here anymore. I checked my watch once more, out of muscle memory than nerves, then looked up as the person I'd chosen stepped into view. We stood facing each other without an audience trying to read between the lines. The officiant spoke plainly. About commitment. About choosing each other with full awareness of the work involved. Nothing sentimental, nothing performative. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't reference the past. I didn't frame anything as survival or victory. I talked about consistency, about trust built in small, boring moments, about knowing that showing up mattered more than grand gestures. I meant every word. We signed the paperwork. We kissed. People clapped not because they were supposed to, but because it felt appropriate. Someone laughed. Someone wiped their eyes. My grandma reached for my hand and squeezed it once firm and proud. Afterward, we stood around talking like it was any other gathering. Coffee, food laid out on folding tables, nothing fancy, no speeches that needed to be managed, no relatives pulling me aside to renegotiate history. At one point, a friend asked if my family would be upset. I shrugged. They've been upset before, I said. It wasn't flippant. It was accurate. Later, while we packed up chairs together, my phone buzzed. A message from my mom. Just one line. I hope you're happy. I read it, then turned the phone off and slid it into my pocket. I didn't need to answer. Happiness didn't require confirmation. We went home afterward, not to a honeymoon destination, but to a place we'd already made ours. We ordered takeout and ate on the couch. I changed into sweatpants and laughed at how ordinary it felt. That ordinariness mattered. In the days that followed, the reaction trickled in. Messages from relatives who'd heard through the grapevine. Some congratulatory, some pointed. I responded when it felt right and ignored the rest. No explanations, no justifications. Kylie sent a short message a week later. Congrats, it said. No sarcasm, no follow-up. I replied with a simple thank you. My parents didn't reach out again, not immediately, not with urgency. The silence felt different now, less charged, less unfinished. At work, nothing changed. I reported on time, completed my tasks, took on new responsibilities as they came. Life continued in the way it always had when I wasn't trying to manage other people's expectations. One evening, my grandma called and asked how married life was treating me. I told her it felt the same, just steadier. She laughed. That's how you know it's right, she said. I thought about that later while folding laundry, about how much of my life had been shaped by instability disguised as love. How often I'd been told to wait, adjust, sacrifice, understand. None of that showed up here. What showed up were quiet mornings, clear decisions, a sense of ownership over my time and energy that no one could vote on. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won anything. What I felt was settled, like I'd stopped bracing for impact. People like to frame stories like this as revenge, as if the goal is to make someone else feel small. That was never the point. The point was to stop being adjustable. My parents didn't lose me at the wedding. They lost me years earlier when they decided I was optional. The wedding just made that reality visible. I didn't keep photos off social media out of spite. I kept them off because the moment didn't need witnesses who hadn't earned access. The people who mattered already knew. Sometimes late at night, I think about the girl who packed one suitcase and believed she'd be back by August. I don't feel sorry for her anymore. I feel grateful. She didn't know it then, but being removed from the center forced her to build something that didn't depend on approval. I built a life with rules that applied to everyone, including me. If my parents ever figure out how to show up without conditions, they'll find me exactly where I am. Not waiting, not explaining, just living. And that more than anything I could have said or withheld is what finally made the difference. If there's one thing this story taught me, it's this family drama doesn't end when you explain yourself better. It ends when you stop negotiating your worth. In a lot of family revenge stories, people expect yelling confrontation or some big emotional payoff. But real revenge is quieter. It's building a life so solid that favoritism, betrayal, and old roles no longer have access to you. Being abandoned didn't break me. It forced me to grow. And choosing my own path through the military, through discipline, through boundaries, was the moment I stopped being the backup child and became my own person. If this family revenge story resonated with you, or if you've lived through your own family drama, you're not alone. Subscribe to the channel for more real-life stories about resilience chosen family and rebuilding your life when the people who should have protected you didn't.